Man, Kyle, you've been playing your guitar. Sounds good.
You know what I'm doing. Man, I'm so sorry, Kevin. You know, I love that song. That's a fantastic song. Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. Well, hey.
You know who this is?
Oh, yeah, it's Chris Stapleton. That dude is awesome. Have you ever watched the videos of people around the world listening to him play and sing?
Of Chris Stapleton? No, I've not. What is that like a thing?
No, it's fantastic because especially people who really like blues or jazz or hip-hop or whatever, and then they play that song in particular, Tennessee Whiskey, and they say, that guy is so amazingly talented. Not necessarily on the guitar, his vocals, with the range that he's got, right?
He is very talented on the guitar too. I would debate that with anybody.
Yeah,
he's really good on guitar.
And I'm not saying they're not appreciating that. It's just that
his vocals are amazing.
Yeah,
too.
He just sounds like a blues guy. He
very soulful.
He doesn't sound like a country guy by any means.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Hey, Kevin, welcome to How to Be a Texan. How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Good. You know, I thought today we would talk about something that is interesting, right? Something we've never talked about. We've never talked about an alcohol episode, right? But today I thought, today's the day. You know,
today's the day?
Why haven't we done a margarita episode? Margaritas are kind of like the staple of Texas, right?
That's true. I think it's the Texas state drink. We've talked about doing it. We've just never. We've talked about doing a lot of episodes.
Margaritas are fantastic. Do you like a good margarita?
Oh yeah, I do.
Are you a frozen or an on the rocks guy?
On the rocks.
I'll be
totally on the rocks. Unless we're at a party where you bring your big on the rocks ice machine.
Oh yeah.
Then I go all in on the rocks.
You know that thing will cut your finger off if you're not careful. You know how sharp that ice shaver thing is? So crazy. Anyway,
it's intense.
Hey, today's not...
Well, but, you know, just to wrap that up, every time I think of margaritas now, though, I think of that last get-together we had with our little small group. And we had Brian Kersey's running around like a mad scientist trying to get all the ratios right, if you remember.
He did. He had it totally dialed in.
Yeah, and you were just throwing crap in this. It's basically a blender, but it's like
a blender.
Got a jet engine on it or something.
It's a blender with a jet engine on it.
Yeah, and then Brandon just said, "Fine, I'm doing my own thing." So he went over in the corner, and he was squeezing all these little tiny limes. He had the tiniest limes, and he sat there for like an hour just squeezing all these little limes, making his own thing over there.
Yeah,
and I was just standing back and watching all this and just cracking up.
Yeah, you know.
It was so much fun.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, that's margarita talk. But today, Kevin, I thought we would talk about bourbon. And not just bourbon, but the whiskey family. And so there's really the interest in that because there's a lot of interest in, you know, and here I am, you know, a 54-year-old. And up until a couple of years ago, I could have cared less about any of that stuff. People would say, "Oh, hey, Kyle, what bourbon do you like?" I'm like, I don't, you know. I like a good Diet Coke. But over the last couple of years, especially when my nephew Ben and his wife Taylor moved up to Louisville, Kentucky, and then I went up to see him a couple of times, did I really become, you know, kind of a fan, you know, to become...
He started educating you on bourbon?
Well, he did. You know, kind of we went up, I took Caroline after she turned, I think, 21, and we went up there and we visited them, and then we go out to the Jim Beam distillery, and it's the biggest one in the world. And just seeing that, I'm like, hey, there's, you know, the scientist comes out in me. There's a lot of science in this, and certainly a lot of history and a lot of depth. And so there must be something to this.
So isn't there like a couple of big distilleries up there where a lot of the brands that we know come out of just a couple of places? Is that right?
Yeah. So
Jim Beam's one.
Jim Beam's the biggest by far.
It's the biggest one.
Buffalo Trace is the second one, and I'd say Wild Turkey is the third. So now that
Wild Turkey's its own kind of distillery?
Well, there's a billion, I say a billion, there's a lot. There's the whole bourbon trail throughout Kentucky, and you know, they've got that limestone, and they say, it's interesting because when you say bourbon, there's a whole lot of really passionate opinions on what bourbon is. A lot of people, especially from Kentucky, will say, well, the only bourbon is from Kentucky, just like Scotch can only be from Ireland, right? So, or no, Scotland.
Yeah, you cannot
Scotland.
put.
My apologies.
Yeah, from what I understand, you cannot put the word Kentucky bourbon on your bottle,
Nor should you,
unless it's from that specific region.
Yeah. Nor should you.
Bourbon is like a region, right?
It is like a region, but most people, kind of purists, will say that bourbon is only from Kentucky. That's actually not true, because it's frankly a recipe. Just like my pies we're talking about, I can make a pie anywhere, but they can make what's called bourbon, and it's a very specific formula. But it's from this water that washes over this limestone, and they say it's the perfect water to infuse into this, and how they make their mash ultimately that comes into the bourbon. So I've just learned so much about it. But before we start, Kevin, I know you and I are toasting each other, and so what is your drink of choice as we get into our discussion on whiskeys and bourbons?
For today's discussion, I brought actually a Texas bourbon, which some of your purists out there might say, well, you can't make bourbon in Texas. But they're not claiming that it's Kentucky style or anything like that. They're just saying it's Texas bourbon. And this one is, I'll show you the thing on the video.
Oh, yeah.
As if our viewers can
actually see beautiful.
This. But Balcones, which I found out was the first bourbon distillery, like legit distillery, to open up in Texas.
Okay.
And that was very recent. It was like in the early 2000s when this thing actually opened.
Yeah.
And so that's what I brought. What'd you bring?
So today I've got my buddy Mike Maney at work. He gave me this. What do you call these fancy glasses?
I don't know. I just call it a whiskey glass.
It's a Glencairn glass.
Okay.
I do think it's a Scottish-based glass, and it's got this cool little bourbon tasting whatever. It's it's built just for you to have a really deep nose
for tasting whiskey.
Yeah, for tasting whiskey. And so you're able to stick your nose right in there, and you get a deep smell to appreciate that. Swirl it around to see the legs come down, really absorb the color, the smell, all that, and then ultimately taste it. Anyway,
I did get these glasses in Scotland. Yeah. I had not had this style until we went to Scotland this past summer, and I brought 4 or 5 of those.
Yeah,
home.
so
but they really like amplify the like what they call the nose.
Yeah. So then what I've got today is what many people who I've talked to have said this is probably one of the finer low-end bourbons that you can get, and it's Woodford Reserve Double Oaked.
Double Oak.
Yeah. And,
yes. Double Oak. I like Woodford, but even Double Oak's like next level of Woodford. It's really, really good. It's one of my favorites too.
$60 a bottle, which is very reasonable. So I'm not going to get the Pappy whatever, that's $2,500 a pour. That's
Pappy Van
Winkle?
That's
one of the Jim Beam. That is the Jim Beam, ultimate bottle. Is the Pappy Van Winkle.
Okay, so Pappy comes out of the Jim Beam.
Yeah, and then you've got Blanton's and Weller's and Colonel What's-His-Face and all these others that come out of the Jim Beam family. But then, out of the, I don't know, you've got Woodford that has a series of kind of brands and bottles that come out of. They're all under the Woodford Reserve. Wild Turkey's interesting, where they've got Russell's, which Russell's is a very, very popular brand.
Yes,
and then of course,
I've had Russell's.
Of course, Wild Turkey. Those are the two big.
Yeah,
and then
Buffalo
Trace and Jim Beam in my mind are the two ginormous brands. And so if you ever do get a chance to go to Kentucky, you should totally go to those two. You start with Buffalo Trace, which is a marketing machine. Everybody lines up at 7 or 8 o'clock. They open the line at 9 o'clock, and you go through this long zigzaggy line and get in. And they're selling one of their premium brands at 9 o'clock for about, a third of MSRP. And so you can get a Blanton's for like $20, which is pretty awesome.
So do they only offer that price for like an hour?
Until they sell out of that premium for the day.
Until they sell out of
for the day.
Got
and
it.
they allot, several hundred bottles or whatever. And so
one thing finish that. Then I had a question.
Just the day that I got to go with Ben and Taylor, it was Weller's. It was one of the Wellers, and so I got a bottle of Weller's for $20.
I like Weller,
which is great. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
So one thing I didn't really understand until relatively recently was that a lot of these bourbons that we like all come from the same distilleries, right? So you said Buffalo Trace is one of the biggest. Yeah. What all brands that we would know come out of Buffalo Trace Distillery?
Well, it's going to be
You mentioned Weller.
It's going to be Buffalo Trace, Weller's, Blanton's. Those are kind of the top three.
Blanton's does too?
Yeah, and then Pappy Pappy Van Winkle is a Buffalo Trace brand. It's not a Jim Beam brand.
It's a Buffalo Trace?
I'm so sorry.
It's not a Jim Beam? Okay.
So those are the four, but then there's then I start losing it on the Colonel E.H. Taylor and all the others. There's a whole series of probably 8 or 10 brands that have kind of rolled up into the Buffalo Trace family. Same thing over on the Jim Beam family. There's 8 or 10 that they've absorbed into the kind of the greater big Jim Beam kind of family of bourbons. And it's just cool to see. Like, so if you were going to go to the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky and you were only able to see 2, and I was able to see, let's call it 10 or 12 now, I would definitely go to Jim Beam and I would go to Buffalo Trace. Those are by far the coolest ones.
So you went through the Buffalo Trace distillery, right? And then I assume they gave you a little bit of an education on kind of how they do it.
That's still there is the biggest one in the world, and it's over 4 stories tall. So you stand at the bottom of it and you're looking straight up at the still, and it's just unbelievably big. But they're producing so much, that goes around the world.
Yeah. So, but these different brands that come out of there, right? So Buffalo Trace, Pappy Van Winkle, Weller,
Blanton, all that,
whatever, Blanton's. Are they using different stills for those, or is it a different recipe or different aging? What makes them different from each other?
So in my mind, in just learning a lot. First of all, I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm a couple of years in on a long journey trying to understand this, but when you kind of take a scientific approach to it, you're like, okay, well, a lot of people use the same mash, which is kind of the bourbon. It's got to be, a bourbon is in the whiskey family, a Scotch is in the whiskey family, and these are grain-based alcohols that have a certain level of grain in it. They've also have a certain amount of alcohol in it, and they've got there's certain standards on, what the aging process is and the time for each one of them. Like for a bourbon, it's supposed to be aged at least 2 years. Many of the and an oak barrel. A lot of times it has to say a white oak barrel, and that's got to be a charred white oak barrel, which is crazy. So then you get over to the Scotches, and they don't have the same requirement. They have a different where they
have a different one.
Yeah. And then
so we did a Scotch whiskey experience over in Scotland this summer, and similar type of thing. They took us through the various regions that produce Scotch in Scotland and all the various aging and all that kind of stuff. And I've forgotten most of what they told us there, but it was fascinating. But I think one of the key differences is that bourbon it has to have a certain amount of corn actually in the mash. Is that right?
51%. And
51%. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's what makes it. That's why bourbon's like an American thing, right? Because we had corn over here, and people started doing this in Kentucky, making this whiskey out of corn.
Yeah, and then you look
at
Scotch, which is made primarily out of malted barley, and so then you've got this kind of 51% load of malted barley. Or you might hear of rye whiskey, which instead of corn, it's going to be a rye, which is like a wheat or a barley, and it's made out of that 51%. Rye. Which is a grain.
I like the rye stuff too. It's got a little bit of a spicy kind of flavor to it.
And again, I feel like I'm just kind of getting a taste for it all, but I agree on the rye. It's kind of more, as opposed to if it's sweet, if you're new to it, you'll just be like, oh my gosh, that's firewater. Well, it takes, and for me, I kind of like to put it on, a cube or two of ice to start kind of letting that water cut that flavor down just a little bit, but so it's not quite as, just punch you right in the nose when you take a sip of it, So, well, I was telling you earlier, there's this Canadian guy, and he's, I don't know if we can figure out how to put the link in there, but this Canadian guy on YouTube, and he's so serious about it where he'll take one bourbon and he'll do a 10-minute video on it, and the first 3 or 4 minutes are all about how it looks, and then he's doing a deep nose and then a reflection on that, and he really takes a long time to go through the smelling of it, and then he finally takes his first taste, and then he just absorbs it. It's almost like unwrapping a poem, It's like he just is telling you about the lingering effect on the back of the tongue, and that kind of a thing. Just so serious. I'm sure if I was like a sommelier for wine, it would be a similar experience. But I'm an idiot about wine. So.
Well, I'm kind of there with both wine and whiskey. Kendra and I joined a wine club. Maybe
that's fun.
A year and a half ago. So every month we go into this little place in Denton, and they have a wine tasting for us, and they have all these. They come out, they present you each wine, they talk about what you should get on the nose and on the palate and all this stuff. And I'm getting to where I can pick up some flavors, on my palate. But every time they talk about what's on I just smell it, and I just smell alcohol. That's all I can ever smell. It's just alcohol. And then before we started, we were doing this with these little glasses, and this like burned my nostril hair off, just sticking my nose in this glass.
Oh, no, it's...
So anyway, I'm getting where I can taste some of these notes, but I still don't have anything on the nose other than just pure, ethanol fumes burning my brain out.
Oh, that's great. Well, kind of as a public service announcement, it seems like it would be helpful. There are a few things that confuse me. And number one is the difference between whiskey, bourbon, and Scotch in particular. And so I thought maybe I'll just read a couple of things because we did that, and to me it was really, really helpful. And so when you look at a whiskey, they're all that Scotch and bourbon and whiskey is kind of the patriarch of the three. So
yeah, they're all whiskeys. Yeah, right?
Scotch and bourbons are all whiskeys, but Scotch is not a bourbon, bourbon's not a Scotch, and bourbon may not. A whiskey may not be a bourbon or a Scotch, so it doesn't have to be.
It could be a rye whiskey. It could be a Japanese.
Here's kind of the overarching definition of what a whiskey is. It's distilled from a blend of fermented grains. It's categorized based on the ratio of grains, and it's aged in hardwood barrels or wooden casks. So that's kind of the overarching definition. But then when you get into bourbon, then it's got to be at least 51% corn. That's the first kind of deal, and it's aged in charred white oak barrels. So then, you're like, okay. And then, of course, Kentucky people say, well, it can only be bourbon if it's using that limestone water, which is quite wonderful out of Kentucky.
Well, that's true, like Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But,
so, like, on your bottle that you have there, do you have your Woodford
No, it's
there with
back
you?
in the cabinet, but it says Kentucky bourbon.
It says Kentucky, yeah. So on mine does not say Kentucky. Okay. It just says bourbon. Yeah. So they cannot put...
Well, so
Kentucky bourbon, even if it's of the same style, it has to be, I think, just made right there in that certain region. And I think is bourbon like a county where these distilleries are or something?
No, it's more of a mindset. So
no, I think it's a geographical region. Let me look this up.
Well, the Kentucky Bourbon Trail kind of meanders all across central and northern Kentucky, so it's much broader than one county.
Just one county, okay.
Yeah, because it goes across Louisville and Lexington, and it goes through all the backcountry. You're driving all these windy roads. It's like there's not any interstates in Kentucky, which is a good thing, I guess. But those are some windy roads. Let's put it that way. So get ready for car sickness if you got to ride the back seat. So there's a lot of vans that take you around. Like you can go and do all the tasting, like. The second time I went, we went to 8. So it was right before Ben and Taylor moved back to East Texas because he got a job back here. And I go up. I'm at a conference up there. I'm like, well, and I spent the weekend with them. I'm like, what do y'all want to do? And they're like, we want to hit the rest of the distilleries, and we know that you're up for it, Uncle Kyle. And I'm like, let's go. So we hit 8 in one Saturday, and it was crazy fun. But what we didn't do is we didn't do all the testings. Otherwise, we would not have been functional, you know?
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so we just went and experienced it, and if they would give a discount, we'd buy, and we just collected tons and tons of things to try for years to come, which is super fun. So
this says that the name, some people think the name derives from the French Bourbon dynasty, whatever that means.
Oh, okay.
Although that's not certain. And then some other folks think that it comes from the Bourbon County. So there is some county in Kentucky called Bourbon County, but that's not certain either.
All right. Well,
so they really don't know. But I mean, to your point, it's all over Kentucky, basically at this point.
It's a cool trip to take if you can go on the bourbon tour. One other thing that kind of struck me as weird is just the word whiskey, and there's an EY and a Y. There's two different ways to spell it.
I was just looking at that too.
And so,
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so just what I've got here is, both are technically correct. However, the American and the Irish brands always spell it whiskey with an EY, while Scotland, Canada, and a large portion of the EU tended to use just whiskey with WHISKY, no E in there.
And Japanese. Mine says Scottish, Canadian, or Japanese.
Okay, that's cool.
Have you ever had Japanese whiskey?
No, not yet.
It's actually really, really, really
I'm
good.
sure.
It's really good.
I'm sure of that. So, so then what I've done is I'm like, well, okay, let's collect some and try some and just see kind of what I like. And so far it's been there. We'll talk about some of the Texas whiskeys and Texas bourbons here in just a minute, but that there are.
Yeah, because we have to answer Andrew's question of what does Kentucky bourbon have to do with Texas?
Yeah, I will tell you, there's a TX whiskey that's made in Fort Worth that I would encourage everybody to go.
Oh, it's really good.
And now they have a TX blended whiskey, which is probably as good as anything I've had. And it's very, very drinkable. It's not too kind of like over the top, going to scorch your nose hairs, that kind of thing. And it's just really, really good. They have a distillery in Fort Worth, and it's I haven't gone there, but it's supposed to be super, super fun. It's built on an old country club, and they kind of repurposed it and built this incredible distillery. And so if you're able to go down there, please do. So it is really, really good. But so then what I did is, of course, you know me, I've got lists out the wazoo. I watched probably 10 different videos of bourbon experts, and they're like, well, if you're gonna get some, these are the ones you get. And so I've got this kind of tick list of, like, when we went to the 8 distilleries, I was literally hunting on like Old Forester 1920 or the Red Label Russells or Wild Turkey 101 or Woodford Reserve Double Oaked or whatever. And so I was ticking those off and getting a bottle of each one as I was going through, just so that I could kind of compare my tastes to kind of the experts. And plus, these are all bottles that are $62 or less, in my opinion. I'm generally not going to spend, number one, I'm too cheap to spend $100+ on a bottle of bourbon that I won't appreciate yet. You know what I mean?
I would. If you buy it, I would appreciate it.
I'm sure. I'm positive of that. But
put some in a pecan pie and drop it off.
I'm about to get on that kick again. So anyway,
well, for those of you that may not have heard or are new, Kyle makes phenomenal pecan, but they're bourbon chocolate pecan pies.
Yeah.
And they are amazing.
Yeah,
and it's that time of year.
Tis the season, right? So it's time to start making, and they call that in Louisville for the Kentucky Derby? They call those Derby pies. Isn't that crazy? So it's a bourbon chocolate chip pecan pie. They call it the Derby pie. It's like,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So once
okay.
I got there, I'm like,
know
oh,
that.
crap. I thought this was a really unique recipe. No, it's not at all.
You thought. Well, it's still really
That's
good.
pretty tasty.
No, the first time you made that pie, you thought it was total crap, and you didn't even try it. You just left it on my mailbox.
I just left it on. Yeah, I don't know where I left it on. It was just kind of embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. I just came hat in hand and just put it on your doorstep or something.
Yeah. And then me and Kendra both ate it, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's the best pie we ever ate. We started texting you and Amy. Y'all did not believe
I thought you were
us.
just
You're
teasing.
like,
I thought you were just being mean. Like, come on, man. Don't twist the knife, man. Come on, don't do it.
And then you were like, oh, maybe I should.
And so then I made another one the next day, and I'm like, holy crap, this is really good.
That is good.
Yeah, but it's hard to screw up if you put enough sugar, brown sugar, Caro syrup, which is like, I don't know, liquid sugar, and then you put some, I don't know. I mean, that's all it is. It's just kind of really sweet stuff. Yeah. Anyway.
But, I still prefer that original recipe where you went avant-garde on the crust even.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like a graham cracker crust.
Yeah, no. I got to where I could make...
That's legit.
I got to where I could make the crusts and all that, so it's fun.
I still like the graham cracker.
That's pretty good, too.
Avant-garde.
No, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So... Anyway, so then...
Well, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to our pies this fall.
I'll spin up on pie making because it is what's fun, too, because, it's chemistry with a fun output, in my opinion. So,
yeah.
Okay, so then if we look at, it's just gotten so popular. Bourbons and whiskeys are so popular that the growth of that, I mean, this is like a $4.5 billion industry just in the U.S.
Is it really?
Isn't that crazy?
Oh my god!
$4.5 billion. Who knew?
That is crazy.
So the Garris.
Did you look at like during pandemic? Did it spike even more?
Sure, but you remember I had all kinds of evil theories about what was going to happen in COVID, and not much of it happened. Like I thought there was going to be this massive baby boom, and so I went and bought Carter stock.
Did you really? You didn't tell me you.
No, I went and bought baby clothes stock because I'm like, I'm going to kill it.
This thing's going to take off.
Yeah. Everybody's going in and they're going to go at it like little rabbits, and we're going to have babies everywhere. And that did not materialize. Matter of fact, the opposite happened. All these Gen Zs are like scared to death to like have kids. Or I'm not bringing a kid into a virally infected world.
I'll just sit back and drink bourbon instead.
Yeah, they probably did. So anyway, just kind of to my luck, Carter's actually went up during the pandemic. So it's fine. It was fine. Right. It was a lucky guess. Never allow me to pick your stocks, Kevin, because my rationale is probably not all that thoughtful.
I kind of went in on like who I thought would be making the vaccines or other technologies. That did okay. Yeah. I mean, it did all right. That didn't kill it.
Did you buy President Putin stock?
No, I didn't actually.
You remember he tested it on his daughter.
Right. He injected his own daughter. We talked about that on one of our episodes.
Stupid. It's like, I think it works. It didn't kill that baboon. Here, honey, come here.
He's like, Mr. Putin, who should we test the vaccine on? Would you like to try it yourself, sir?
No, her.
Give it to my daughter.
The ugly one.
What a coward, man.
Gosh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Golly, I would never do that, baby girl. So, anyway, what are you going to do? Putin.
Jeez.
Anyway, then he goes off and starts a war. What are you going to do, Kevin?
Yeah, he's
out of control.
He's something else.
So anyway, there's a whole list of 15. You gave me an article. It says the 15 best Texas bourbons for a bold drinking experience.
Yeah, so I thought since this is How to Be a Texan, we might want to...
let's wrap it back in so Andrew doesn't get mad at us and throat punch us.
Yeah, so you want me to share my screen?
Well, it doesn't matter. They can't see. This is not YouTube, Kevin.
No, just for you.
No, I got it right here. It's right here. Anyway, I'm good.
All right.
So there's this Balcones Texas Blue Corn Bourbon. Now, that sounds good.
Okay. So when I went up to pick this up, I ran up to our local liquor store here in North Lake. It's called Liquor Land.
It's a nice name.
very classy.
Liquorland.
Liquorland. It's right by the RV park.
Oh. Well, there's food trucks in there, too. That's fantastic, though.
Food trucks are at the top of the hill.
Yeah, that's right across your house. We come over to the food trucks a lot and get snow cones.
Yeah, that's a good spot.
Yeah,
But, but North Lake someday will upgrade to have a full-blown trailer park, but we just have an RV park right now next door to Liquorland.
Hey, I'm on board with RVs. RVs, I do a lot of YouTube videos of RV tours because they're so fancy now.
Oh, okay. I don't think these are the fancy ones over there by Liquorland. I don't think they're the fancy ones.
Well,
but anyway, I went in there. Yeah, but they had a Balcones blue corn, but it said whiskey. It didn't say bourbon on it. So
they have the two. See, you have corn based, and then they have some extra grains in there.
Yeah. So I was hoping to get this Balcones Texas blue corn bourbon. Okay. That's the one I wanted, but they didn't have that one. It was blue corn whiskey.
Oh, but you said it tastes nice.
So I picked up a different one. I picked up Balcones Texas pot still bourbon because I wanted it to be a bourbon.
Okay.
And this is really, really, really good. But it's not this particular one.
Okay, so I've read about that. I forgot what there are two types of stills. One is a pot still, and the other is the other still. There's one that's real long and tall, and the other is that pot still, which is kind of like like an I Dream of Jeannie, pot. Seriously, it's kind of what it looks like in my mind. And then there's a still that generates all the alcohol on the other side. And the other one is kind of like the real tall one, like that Jim Beam 4-story sucker that, it's like a tower still, a pot still and a tower still. Let's call it that.
Got it.
That's the difference. So you got the pot still, which is kind of the old school, like what the moonshiners used to use, which that's cool.
Yeah. And that's number 2 on this list. So if you scroll down to the next one, you'll see it. Balcones, Texas, pot still bourbon with the red label.
Yeah, and then I'm going down to 3, Iron Root Republic Harbinger
that's the one I got.
Bourbon. That just sounds cool. Iron Root.
It does. I've not seen that one.
It's a cool bottle. I don't know anything about it.
It is.
Then you got Iron Root, Icarus Straight. Oh, so that's the straight still. Okay.
Icarus.
And then Garrison Brothers.
These names are intense.
Garrison Brothers is the most expensive Texas bourbon, just so you know.
Yeah, and I made a mistake at the beginning. I said earlier that Balcones was the first legal bourbon distillery in Texas, and I was wrong. It's actually Garrison Brothers.
Yeah, but it's just not like, you go back 150. No, you go back 20
No,
years.
It's like 2005.
Yeah, so Garrison Brothers, they started this up after, I think I just read his story. He said he's lost his job, and he's looking around. There's all these craft vodka distilleries, and he's like, well, why can't we get something good versus crap vodka? And so he's like, let's do it. Let's make some whiskey and bourbon. And, he got after it, and so they've had real success.
Yep. It's pricey though.
Yeah, no, it's high dollar. I've never bought it.
$80 a bottle.
See, that's I got to really be feeling it before I do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. But it is a cool story. This guy was in the tech industry, I think, and lost his job or something, and said, you know what, I'll just.
No, good for him. And then here's another one, Herman Marshall. Have you ever had Herman Marshall?
I have actually.
Okay. I have not.
Maybe about this is about maybe 5-6 years ago when we lived in Argyle. Remember up on the corner there was that little liquor store next to the gas station in Argyle? I went in there one Saturday and there was a guy at a little table there. They were giving out free samples. Right. And so he had bourbon. So I walked up, and it was actually this guy, Herman Marshall. It was the guy that owned the whole thing. Yeah. And so I tasted it. I was like, man, this is really good. He said, yeah, you should come over to our distillery. I think they were over in Louisville or something like that at the time. And he said, I'm going to sign the bottle here. And he signed the bottle for me. And he said, just, when you come to the distillery, just give them this bottle. He said, drink it all. Come to the distillery and we'll give you a free refill on that bottle.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really cool. And it was really good. It was really good. Now, I never made it back to the distillery to get the free refill. Okay. I never made it back over there.
No.
But it's really good stuff. I highly recommend it.
What a great story.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I like Herman already.
He's a cool guy.
Maybe I'll have to check out a bottle of Herman. And then here's another one. This is weird. Still Austin, the Musician's Straight Bourbon.
Man, I saw this one at that Liquorland today. It was right there close to this one and Garrison Brothers. And I looked at it and I was like, that label. It doesn't look like a...
It looks like a lady from the great Chinese Communist Republic, you know. She doesn't look Texan.
I didn't know it was on this list, actually. I might have picked it up. But I saw it. And
That's
I thought,
from Austin. What are you going to do?
that.
Those Austin people, man, they're just funky down there.
Bunch of hippies.
Hey, I'm telling you. So anyway, and then look, here's another one. Still Austin Cask Strength Bourbon. So Still Austin. There's another one. And then Firestone and Robertson. Oh, but this is TX Straight. So TX whiskey is what I talked about.
Oh, TX.
Yeah, this is TX.
Straight bourbon.
So the distillery is Firestone and Robertson. Those are the two buddies that built this. So Firestone and Robertson are the two guys that founded this. But then it's TX is what you're going to see. And it's the TX blended whiskey is the favored child over that versus the TX bourbon. Everybody says that.
You think so?
Yeah, no, everybody, Kevin, says the TX whiskey's better than the TX bourbon.
All right. Well, I like them. I like everything TX on it. I like the bottles too. It's kind of
they've got that great story.
Kind of a modern kind of.
No.
Oh, I don't even know the story.
The story on the bottle cap or the cork is really cool because every cork that TX makes is out of reclaimed cowboy boots. There's 4 layers of leather.
Really?
I'm not kidding. They cut the round thing out of reclaimed cowboy boots so that they have leather. There's really 4 layers of pressed cowboy boot leather in the insert of every cork. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if that's a good selling point, though. I mean, would you want any of your boot in a bottle that you were going to
The answer is yes, because it's Texas. That tells me that's Texas.
You're walking around and, Mel's horse manure or cow manure and
that's okay.
All that stuff.
Hey, if I'm drinking whiskey and I'm man enough to say I'm Texan drinking TX with leather boot in it, I'm like,
leather boot manure.
That's pure cowboy. I say yes.
I had no idea.
No, I say cow
it is good.
Manure and all. I think they clean it off before they.
I hope they do. They're like, nah, it's got alcohol in it. It'll kill the
germs. Now, here's another one. It's called Grayson Blended Texas Bourbon. I've not had that. Have you?
I'm not familiar with
that's
that.
100.
That's a nice looking.
Now, that's 119.4 proof, this bottle on this picture. Ooh. Now, do you know, when they say proof, that's basically 2x of the alcohol volume. So if it says it's 120 proof, which is really stout, that means divide it by 2, that's 60% volume of alcohol. Yeah. And so your minimum is 40%. So your 80 proof is minimum on a bourbon. And so when they bottle it, they've got to cut it down to at least 40% alcohol.
So what's the Woodford? I think Woodford is 80 proof, I believe. And I think...
I don't know.
This one I've got here says 46% alcohol. So what would that be? 92 proof?
Yeah, 92 proof. Yeah, and most of them are in that range, that 80 to 100, and then they get a little hot once they get over 100, up to 120, and then it'll blow your socks off when you get up to that 120.
Well, that's why I was going to ask you. That one that we hit a few back was Cask Strength. Have you ever had Cask Strength?
No. And if I have,
it's
I don't
stronger.
know the difference.
I think it's stronger, like 100 proof or something like that.
Yeah. Now I do drink like Wild Turkey 101 is a favorite of a lot of people.
I like that.
And that's 101 proof.
Actually, I like that.
And so that's kind of a tried and true. And so it's 50.5% alcohol, which that's pretty stout, but it tastes good. Again, I'll put an ice cube in it and let water will kind of cut that flavor up. The next one on the list is Milam and Green. I've never heard of them, but I'm sure they're good. Then you get Treaty Oak. Oh, that's pretty.
I've not heard of that one either.
Bent, BNDT.
Oh, Ghost Hill.
Yeah, all these sound really good. Ooh, here's one. Blackland Pecan Brown Sugar Bourbon. That sounds good, right?
Huh. Pecan brown sugar. That might go good in your pecan pie.
Yeah.
Man.
Anyway, so that's probably enough. But there's a lot of burgeoning new brands of whiskeys and bourbons that are in Texas, and it's okay. It's okay if you're just not going to be a Kentucky bourbon. And if you're a purist,
That's
then
right.
you may want to stick with that or start with that as your foundation and grow from there with Georgia bourbons or Alabama whiskeys or whatever.
I can appreciate that. I mean, they invented
They
it.
did.
You know, in Kentucky,
Yeah.
so they should get all
Get
the
that
props.
cred. Got to get that cred.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yep.
Well, hey man, this is good. This is good. This is probably a start of a nice runway of conversations, Kevin. Is that a good consultant-y term?
Yes, it is.
I'm going to let that horse out of the barn.
I mean, the horse is out of the
we're
barn.
going to
The horse
scale
is out of the barn
these
now.
economies of scale so that we can leverage technologies. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we never did come back and do that episode either.
That's so
That's
crap.
another episode.
Anytime a young person ever says, "Oh, hey, I want to leverage I'm like, what? Don't
Leverage.
even. Just walk away. I can't stand consultant talk. So anyway, and I am a consultant. I'll say
right.
that.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks y'all for listening to our rambling episode on bourbons and whiskeys. So
Hey, man, thanks for taking us on the Kentucky bourbon tour, Kyle. I know you've done that.
it is fun.
I've seen the pictures. I've seen the pictures from your trips.
Yeah,
and
if you guys can ever
would love
do
to go
that,
do it
that's a
sometime.
really fun trip. So if y'all can ever do that,
I
please
bet
do.
it is.
You'll have fun.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Give us a review. We'll talk to you later. Adios. Bye.